Imagine yourself in a grand London townhouse where every guest smiles a little too sweetly and every glance lingers a second too long. At the heart of the room, the Duchess of Valmont lifts her glittering snuffbox, an heirloom, a trinket, or perhaps a key to something far more dangerous. Hercule Poirot is present, sipping chocolate, his little grey cells quietly humming. The question is not if a crime will occur, but when. And I ask you, what would you have noticed first? The Duchess's laughter, the restless hands of her niece, or the faint scent of varnish that should never have been there? Chapter 1. A glimmer in Belgravia. The townhouse in Belgravia was all satin light and silver hush, tall sash windows swallowing the late afternoon, a fire that purred rather than crackled, and a faint ghost of bergamot that lingered as a signature more than a scent. Visitors arrived precisely as the clock in the hall plodded to 6. Ladies with pearls that whispered against lace, men with starched collars and careful boredom, and, seated slightly apart in an armchair with tapering legs, Monsieur Hercule Poirot, whose appearance was so impeccably tended it might have been dusted with a feather brush. His moustaches, symmetrical and gleaming, curved like twin commas, alert to every clause of the evening. The hostess, Her Grace, the Duchess Séraphine de Valmont, glided through her drawing-room with the levity of a woman who had learned to make weight look like air. Her age was whispered in society, not rudely, merely as a spice, but her poise belonged to marble. At her wrist clinked a delicate chain attached to a small, opulent snuff-box, oval, enamelled midnight blue, rimmed in tiny diamonds, and topped with a miniature of a Bourbon princess. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her French threaded with London. "You are kind to indulge an old woman's fondness for ceremony." "Ceremony is civility with a little ribbon," Poirot replied, bowing his egg-shaped head. "And civility is a rare perfume, Madame la Duchesse," she smiled. "Then let us keep it in excess tonight." Around them the evening sorted itself into conversational corners. Lady Beatrice Ashcombe, slim, restless, her fingers drumming a cigarette case which, incongruously, she did not open, tilted her chin at a youngish man with too well-combed hair. Victor Morel, an art dealer from Paris whose vowels slid as smoothly as his cufflinks. Sir Lionel Ashcombe, Beatrice's husband, stood as formally as a lamp-post that had risen in the house. His well-cut restraint gave nothing away except a certain disapproval of velvet upholstery. Miss Eliza Gray, the Duchess's companion, sat nearby with the stillness of a good pen, trim, watchful, and ready. And Carlo Ventresca, the valet, moved through the doorways like a comma, brief, essential, and scarcely noticed. It was a gathering of polite textures, the crackle of the fire, the whisper of silk, the murmured intrigue of a world that preferred its secrets under glass. Poirot observed all this with the serenity of a gardener assessing a greenhouse, the angles of glances, the pinch of shoulders, the minute betrayals that bloom on the surface when the roots below are tangled. The Duchess raised her snuff-box and tapped it delicately as one might summon a tiny bird. "A family heirloom," she told Victor Morel, whose admiration tilted just shy of possessive. "A gift, so the story goes, from a queen to a foolish ancestor who mistook loyalty for flattery and wore both like cologne." "Exquisite," Morel murmured. "The enamel breasts, perhaps? And the mounting later. The juxtaposition is thought-provoking." "Everything is thought-provoking to a dealer," Sir Lionel said, crisp as a halfpenny. "Even when there is no thought." Beatrice's laugh was thin. "Lionel, do be polite. Mr. Morel sees value where others see old paint. That's a talent, in its way." Miss Gray's eyes flicked from the snuff-box to Beatrice's cigarette case and back again. Poirot noticed. He noticed also the faintest glimmer of varnish in the air, a sharp note under the bergamot, here and gone. Curious. The Duchess leaned over to Poirot. "I am told you are the man for difficulties," she said softly. It may amuse you to know that difficulties adore me. They arrive with flowers, they stay for soup, and they leave me tired. Difficulties have bad manners, Poirot agreed, but they make excellent foreshadowing. Her smile thinned. Then allow me a curious anecdote. Twice this week I have found my snuff-box moved from its place. Carlos swears he touched nothing. Miss Grey is horrified at the idea. And my niece, she glanced towards Beatrice, has no taste for snuff or for trifles that are not of the present day. Yet it is as though a child had played with it and forgotten to put it back precisely. Precise, Poirot said, is a word I cherish. Then you will like this house, the Duchess returned, or hate it if you see the imprecisions more than the care. A door opened behind them, and Inspector Arthur Sharp of Scotland Yard entered, announced by nothing save the sudden tightening of shoulders. He was an Englishman made almost caricature by his integrity, tidy, dour, and unpretentious. He had come for the wine auction catalogues that the Duchess had promised him. They met at charitable speeches where he pretended, with moderate failure, to be at ease. "Inspector," the Duchess said, "you and Monsieur Poirot have both made careers of noticing the small things. Tonight, perhaps, you will notice my guests." "Merely as a hobby, Your Grace," Sharp said, and it was almost a joke. He took the catalogues and declined a glass. Poirot saw him glance, only the once, at Lady Beatrice's rapid fingers, at the glinting snuff-box, at Sir Lionel's bored mouth. Sharp was not Poirot, but he was not blind. From the mantel, a carriage clock ticked with prim self-importance. Outside, a handsome carriage jostled the curb. The driver swore with poetry unfit for carpets. The evening proceeded. What detail would you have noticed in this moment? The varnish note? The restless fingers? The chain from wrist to snuff-box like a dainty shackle? Poirot noted them all and filed them. The little grey cells enjoy an orderly shelf. As the Duchess bid her guests to dinner, oysters, then a clear consommé, Beatrice fell into step beside Miss Grey. "You must be very attached to her," she said. "It must be rather like being a guardian angel, tiresome and thankless." Miss Grey's voice was soft. "Gratitude is a matter of perspective, Lady Beatrice. I am grateful." Sir Lionel glanced at the snuff-box again. "One wonders what a relic like that contains," he said idly. "Snuff?" said the Duchess. "And a song from the past." Poirot thought of songs that did not end in harmony. Later, in the corridor, as coats were fetched, he paused beside the carriage clock. Dust lay in a faint crescent at its base, as if something had been moved and replaced in recent hours. Beyond the window, the sky sharpened into evening steel. He touched the clock and it hesitated, then resumed. "An obedient child." "Order," Poirot murmured to himself, "is very fragile." In the mirror of the vestibule he saw 5 faces reflect and diminish. The Duchess, composed. Lady Beatrice, brittle. Sir Lionel opaque. Victor Morel, appreciative. Miss Grey, attentive. Carlo, entering with a tray, carried silver that had been polished past sincerity. A house, too neat, can be a house in which someone has recently erased a mess. And somewhere under the neatness a secret hummed, small and constant, like a bee in a winter room. Chapter 2. A box that would not sit still. The following afternoon drew the light thinly through the Belgravia house, laying pale stripes across the Salon Bleu. Miss Grey read to the Duchess from a memoir in which everyone was brave and nobody had muddy shoes. Poirot arrived at 3, punctual as a foreign postage stamp. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," the Duchess said, "I am flattered you have returned." "Curiosity is the debt I pay to my profession," he said, setting his hat at precisely the angle it would prefer to resume later. "And to civility. You mentioned your snuff-box had become a wanderer." She lifted her wrist and let the small oval glitter. "A truant," she said. "But see, it is leashed." Poirot studied the chain, delicate but new, not matched to the mounting. The polish on the snuff-box's hinge was different from the polish on its lid. The hinge shone with a slightly harder brightness, like a smile held too long. He bent, raised the box with gloved fingers, and held it as one holds court gossip. "May I?" he asked. "You may," the Duchess said. He turned the box, his expression mild. The fragrance that rose, faint but distinct, was not merely tobacco. It was something with a glossy edge, resinous like fresh varnish on a violin. You would not notice it unless you expected old oak and found newly planned wood. "Miss Grey," Poirot said gently, "who cares for this object in the ordinary course?" "I do, Monsieur Poirot." "I dust the cabinet, and I check the chain." "Carlo does the silver, but I never allow him to touch this. His cloth is too enthusiastic." "Yet recently someone has been enthusiastic," Poirot murmured. "Do not be alarmed. The world is full of cloths." The door opened, and Victor Morel appeared, his tie as precise as his compliments. "I bring my respects and also perhaps a small excitement," he announced. "Your Grace, you mentioned the miniature on your snuff-box. I discovered a reference in a dealer's letter from 1870, an enamel of a Bourbon princess, remarkably similar. I should like to photograph the piece for comparison, if you will allow." The Duchess hesitated. "I do not encourage the reproduction of what is better unique," she said, "but your scholarship pleases me. Miss Grey, attend Mr. Morel." Morel's camera, a trim little contrivance, clicked like a polite fingernail. He did not touch the box, not even when the Duchess permitted him. Poirot watched his eyes instead of his hands. They were the eyes of a man playing a scale he had practiced until it could pass for spontaneity. Morel admired, but he also measured, Sir Lionel called, Miss Grey said when Morel was gone. He invited Lady Beatrice to luncheon at White's. She returned. "Distracted. Distracted is not a word that suits the English clubs," Poirot said. "They do not encourage it," Miss Grey's mouth quirked. "Lady Beatrice encourages what the room forbids." Bong. Poirot admired rule-breakers with moderation. They often left excellent footprints. At 4, Lady Beatrice herself arrived, veneer crackling, the glint of a woman whose nerves had lapped at the rim of the glass. She kissed the Duchess, then dropped into a chair as if chairs had betrayed her in the past. "Aunt Seraphine, Lionel has a beastly committee," she began, and made a complicated gesture toward the snuff-box. "I cannot think how you endure all these heirlooms. They look at one as if judging." "Heirlooms are the grandparents of manners," the Duchess said. "They keep the young from running in hallways." "Unfair," Beatrice pouted. "I adore a hallway," Poirot quietly. "And the snuff?" Beatrice's shiver was delicate. "I detest it. Makes me think of old men counting coins, and of secrets that smell like furniture." "Some secrets smell like violets," the Duchess said. "One ought never to confuse fragrance with content." The carriage clock chimed 5, then snagged, as if a gear had caught its breath. Poirot glanced at it. Dust had been brushed from the base in a recent crescent. Someone tidied in haste, or in too careful an imitation of haste. "Miss Grey," Poirot said, "were there visitors yesterday after we left?" "A message arrived late," she said, "from Inspector Sharp. He returned for a paper he had left behind. Carlo let him in." "Ah!" Poirot's mind arranged these details like plates at a dinner. "And Sir Lionel?" "Only on the telephone," Miss Grey said. "He dislikes appearing without being announced." "Wise," Poirot said. "One must always be announced to one's conscience." Evening pooled in the corners. Carlo lit the lamps, moving soundlessly. The Duchess rose with the dignity of a page turning. "Forgive me," she said to Poirot. "These little things tire me." "But you will not worry too much." "Never too much," Poirot said. "Only exactly." As he took his leave, the faint note of varnish pricked his nose again. In the hall, the telephone sat like an obedient dog. Poirot lifted the receiver and set it down. A thread of dust clung to the cradle, recently disturbed. By whom and when? What detail would you have paused at? The new chain? The different polishes? The clock's false hesitation? Poirot paused at all of them, then walked into the evening with neat steps and untidy thoughts. Chapter 3. A death that pretended to be polite. It was the scream that brought the household running. Not a vulgar scream, but the thin, surprised sound that a woman makes when a beloved cup breaks in her hand. Miss Grey stood at the threshold of the Duchess's boudoir, her book fallen, her eyes not yet comprehending the figure in the armchair near the fire. The Duchess had gone still in a way that argued serenity and insisted upon terror. The snuff-box lay on the small table at her side, lid ajar, a pinch of pale powder like the dust of a butterfly's wing on a lace handkerchief. The chain had slipped from her wrist and pooled, shining as if amused by its escape. Carlo was there first, then Lady Beatrice, white about the mouth, then Sir Lionel, who, arriving moments later from a cab, seemed irritated by the drama, as if death were indelicate in the late afternoon. Victor Morel, summoned from the street by Miss Grey's frantic call, arrived last, the urgency in his voice at odds with the composure of his hands. Poirot had been on his way back, invited by neither conscience nor calendar, but by the arithmetic of unease. He came into the room precisely as Inspector Sharp, alerted from the yard by a telephoned message, mounted the stairs 2 at a time. "Do not touch," Poirot said softly. "Allow the silence to speak before we drown it." Miss Grey stood aside. Her face was a portrait of obedience, struggling with grief. Sharp bent over the Duchess with great gentleness. "She is gone," he said. "Forgive me." He did not say to whom. Lady Beatrice gave a small, helpless laugh. "Aunt Seraphine had the best timing," she murmured, and covered her mouth as if she had said something wicked. Sir Lionel's eyes flashed. Beatrice's nerves always unsettled his neatness. Poirot approached the table. The snuff-box's hinge gleamed too hard. "Near the rim, I saw it," he thought. "I saw it yesterday, the slightest meniscus of some clear residue." He looked at the handkerchief. The powder's scent, tobacco, yes, but also a bitter whiff that suggested medicine in the nursery. A tincture, a tonic, digitalis, or nicotine. He would not leap. He would step. "Sharp," Poirot said. "The doctor." "On his way," Sharp answered. "But I can guess what he will say." The Duchess had a weak heart. "Perhaps," Poirot murmured. "Or perhaps someone lent her a weaker one." He looked at the clock on the mantel. It had stopped at 9:27. Impossible and also ridiculous. He had heard it tick not 2 hours before. He lifted it. The dust crescent had altered shape. Someone had moved it, then replaced it clumsily. Time, that obedient child, had been told to misbehave. "Who telephoned you?" Poirot asked Sharp. "One of the staff," Sharp said without turning. "A man's voice. Italian, I think." Carlo stiffened. "I telephoned, Signore Ispettore, after Miss Grey called for me. I was in the pantry. The line was free." "And earlier?" Poirot said. "Was the line free earlier this afternoon?" Carlo blinked. "Earlier the line made a sound like a bee in a jar." "I thought perhaps the wire was loose." Sir Lionel's tone cut like paper. "These details are irrelevant." "A woman has died." "The doctor will determine cause." Poirot looked at him, and the neat roundness of his gaze made Sir Lionel bristle. "The details," Poirot said, "are all that we have." Dr. Merton arrived, a capable, tubby man whose opinions wore woolen socks. He examined the Duchess with care and professional reluctance. "Heart," he said at last. There was fragility. "The stress?" Poirot lifted a brow. "The stress of living," Dr. Merton said, defensive. "It is like a footpath. After a point, another step is too much." "And the snuff?" Sharp asked. "She took snuff daily?" "Occasionally," Miss Grey said faintly. When she was reflective, Poirot asked, "Did she take it now?" "Did anyone see?" Miss Grey shook her head. "I found her." "The box was open." Lady Beatrice spoke up, her voice raw with a brave sort of fear. "I came not 10 minutes before Miss Grey entered. I saw Aunt Seraphine in the mirror at the far end of the hall. She was reading." She waved me away. "I went to fetch my scarf." When I returned, she swallowed the end of her sentence. Sir Lionel took her hand as if he were holding back a dog from the hunt. Victor Morel's eyes were wet. She spoke to me of the box, he said. Only yesterday. She smiled. Poirot stood back and let the room's temperature settle. He stared at the little oval of blue, the hinge, the scent, the unpleasant idea of a helpful poison. The snuff in the box, one could analyze it. But science would tell them what? He would tell them who and why. He straightened his cuffs. Inspector, he said, with your permission, I will ask questions. Sharp's nod was brief. With my gratitude, Poirot turned to the 5 faces. He spoke mildly, Belgian softness padding each English syllable. Mesdames et messieurs, I ask for patience and honesty, the one you can give. The other you must decide, and to you, listener, what would you ask first? Who touched the box? Who had reason for the Duchess to fall asleep and not wake? Or who needed something the box concealed? Poirot's eyes rested for a delicatissimo beat on the miniature of the Bourbon princess. Miniatures sometimes hide larger histories. He said, we begin. Chapter 4. Polite alibis and impolite clues. Poirot placed each person in turn in the little chair beneath the window, where light made truth more visible and lies more theatrical. Carlo Ventresca, he began. You touched the telephone. Did you touch the snuff-box? No, signore, Carlo said, earnest. I polish only the silver. The Duchess, she does not like my polish for the other things. She says it is too vigorous. Poirot tilted his head. Yet I smell a polish that is not every day. A varnish, perhaps, used recently. Not by you? Carlo faltered. The cabinet maker came last week to mend the hinge of a drawer. He used something. A little brush. He came while the Duchess was in the garden. I was told to watch, and I watched. Merci. Poirot made a mental note. And yesterday evening at 6, when guests were here, what did you see? Carlo's eyes warmed. I see only to serve. But I saw Mr. Morel look at the snuff-box as a tailor looks at cloth. I saw Sir Lionel look at nothing. And Lady Beatrice, she looked at the door. Which door? The door to the study. The Duchess keeps letters there. Bon. Poirot folded that quietly into his little cabinet of thought. Victor Morel sat down as though the chair might judge his posture. Monsieur Poirot, if the box has been altered, I will say this. I did not touch it enough to alter anything. You did not touch it at all, Poirot said. You admire at a respectful distance. This becomes you, Morel's smile was rueful. And yet you suspect me. It is natural. Dealers are always suspected of a desire to separate objects from their owners. Poirot shrugged. You have the passion of the connoisseur. But passion is untidy, and you are tidy. You did, however, research the miniature. I did, Morel conceded. I also inquired discreetly at a sale 10 years ago where a similar piece appeared and vanished. The rumour, only a rumour, was that it contained correspondence, hidden letters. Perhaps that is foolish romance. Foolish romance, Poirot said, is sometimes a very accurate description of history. Lady Beatrice took the chair as if it were a witness box, and she its judge. I adored my aunt, she began, immediately defensive in the way of those who fear the arithmetic of a will. I have nothing to gain by her death. Poirot's voice was silken. That is not strictly accurate, Lady Beatrice. Everyone has something to gain by every death. The question is only what? Her chin lifted. You are very continental, Monsieur Poirot, and you are very English, he said. Courage is your polite word for fear, she laughed once. Very well. I dislike the snuff-box. It reminded me that family is not only parties and invitations, but obligations and secrets. What secrets? Beatrice's gaze slid towards Sir Lionel as if checking her margins. Old letters. My aunt's youth was colourful. I prefer my youth to be my own. Poirot thought. A niece who fears the past. A husband who curates the present. He looked at Beatrice's hands. The cigarette case lay unopened on her lap, as yesterday, a nervous habit in search of an outlet. Sir Lionel sat as if the chair were an opposing counsel. You can ask me anything, he said coolly, which is often an invitation to ask the wrong question. Your movements this afternoon? Poirot asked. At 2 I was at my club, Sir Lionel said. At 3 I telephoned here to see if my wife had left. At 4 I met with a colleague at the Foreign Office. At 5 I took a cab here. That is all recorded if one cares to pry. And yesterday? You returned for a committee paper you left with Her Grace. Yes, Sir Lionel said, bored by the past. Inspector Sharp was there. We exchanged civilities. Poirot tucked that with satisfaction. He would speak with Sharp about civility. Miss Grey took the chair last. She looked fragile and, in looking fragile, looked strong. Miss Grey, Poirot said gently, forgive me, but you do not tell lies well. Do not attempt it. Tell me instead what you fear. My fear, she said slowly, is that Her Grace had begun to think of death the way some women think of a voyage, an adventure to be prepared for, with inventories and receipts. She made lists. She asked me to burn a letter yesterday, and I did. She asked me to find a key, and I did not. It is all small, and yet it feels like a trail of crumbs to a door she intended me to open. A key, Poirot repeated. To what? I do not know. Miss Grey's voice was almost not there. But the snuff-box. There is a tiny irregularity on the inner rim where once there was a notch. I noticed when I dusted the cabinet. I did not mention it. I thought I had imagined it. Poirot's moustaches brightened. A notch. And now the varnish. And the hinge. He stood and walked to the mantel. The clock, obstinate at 9:27, had been corrected while no one watched. Sharp's constable must have adjusted it. Poirot lifted it, felt the faintest smear of oil on the underside, frowned. Inspector, he called, who touched this clock? Sharp appeared, expression sour with an honest man's annoyance. I did, he admitted. It seemed untidy. Untidy, Poirot repeated, amused. You see, we are all guilty of tidiness. He requested a small envelope. He tapped a dusting of powder from the handkerchief into it and sealed it. We will defer to science, he told Sharp, but we will not surrender to it. I prefer a story to a formula. The one tells me motive. What's your story, then? Sharp asked, not unkindly. That someone wished the Duchess to die in the course of an ordinary habit, with time misreported and the telephone conveniently uncertain, Poirot said. Someone who knew of letters, or feared them. Someone who could arrange a varnish, a hinge, a substitution. Substitution? Morel's voice was drawn thin by curiosity. Poirot smiled. But of course, if a snuff-box has a secret, one may substitute the snuff. Poison, my friends, is only a kind of exchange, Beatrice shuddered. Sir Lionel's mouth flattened. Miss Grey shut her eyes. Carlo crossed himself in the language of kitchens. What detail would you suspect now? The cabinet-maker's brush? The club's alibi? The jealousy of an art dealer? Or the nervous hatch of a niece's fear? Poirot's gaze drifted to the telephone, to the dust on its cradle. It had been lifted, replaced, lifted again. Calls made, calls unmade. He thought of voices that would never be summoned. He turned back to them, almost cheerful. We will proceed, he said. We will ask the box to tell us its secret. Boxes, when polite, do not interrupt, but they do confess. Chapter 5. Letters, Lilies, and a False Time. The envelope with the powder went off to the laboratory with a yard messenger. Sharp muttered about bureaucracy and honesty in equal part. Meanwhile, Poirot requested the cabinet-maker's name. Carlo produced a card with the pride of one who pays bills on time. Poirot also asked Miss Grey for access to the study. The study was a lovely trap, leather that smelled exactly as it was supposed to, shelves that suggested good taste had been quietly wealthy for centuries, a small escritoire with a lock that declared itself aristocratic. Poirot ran one fingertip along the edge of the desk and examined the smear. Polish, but not the house's usual beeswax. A sharper, harder scent. Yes, yes, the same signature he had followed like a thin thread from the snuff-box. Miss Grey, he said. You mentioned a key. She opened a drawer and brought out a tin of odds and ends, stubs of sealing wax, a miniature magnifying glass, a brass key that refused to admit its purpose. Her Grace said it belonged to something that no longer wished to be opened, Miss Grey whispered. Poirot tried the key in various locks. It flirted, then sulked. He came at last to a panel in the bookcase, an ornamental carving of lilies, their stems twined in a knot. He pressed. A small compartment breathed open with the shyness of old secrets. Inside lay paper so thin it seemed made of breath. Not many sheets, 4, 5, tied with narrow, faded ribbon. Poirot did not touch them. He looked at Miss Grey. Her face had clearly expected a ghost. "You did not know of this?" he said gently. "No?" She pressed gloved fingers to her throat. Oh, but I guessed. Once I heard the Duchess at night, opening something with a tiny click, folding a paper shut again. She was crying. Poirot closed the panel softly. "We will show these to Inspector Sharp," he said. "But first, tell me why Lady Beatrice looked at this door yesterday." Miss Grey swallowed. "Her ladyship and Sir Lionel are not in agreement." "About money?" "About politics, about whether history is a set of debts one must honour, or a set of tales one may edit. The Duchess had promised something to Lady Beatrice, money for a charitable scheme. It was not forthcoming, or rather it was delayed. Her ladyship came to insist. And Sir Lionel?" Poirot asked. "Sir Lionel believes in the future," Miss Grey said, "which is to say he wishes the past to stop making demands." Poirot adored a good aphorism. "And Mr. Morel?" "Mr. Morel believes in objects," Miss Grey said, with a small smile. "Which is to say he believes in desire." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "So we have belief, he said. "And a Duchess who believed in secrets." Sharp joined them. With proper ceremony he opened the lilies panel, took the letters, and laid them upon the desk. He glanced at the first pages, colour rising in his cheeks. "Good Lord," he said. "These are political. Names, figures. The sort of names that make telephones ring at supper." Sir Lionel entered on cue, his expression prepared for battle. "Inspector," he began, "I must insist—" Sharp snapped the folder shut. "You must insist upon nothing." "These will go to the Home Office." Sir Lionel's jaw registered 20 varieties of disagreement. Poirot watched him with radio-quiet interest. "It seems," Poirot murmured, "that the snuff-box was not merely a jewel. It was a vault." Sir Lionel's gaze sliced to Miss Grey, to Poirot, to the lilies. "You cannot imagine—" he began. "I can imagine very much," Poirot said. "For example, I can imagine a man who fears certain letters being made public. I can imagine him wishing that a woman who guards them might—" "Tire!" Beatrice appeared behind her husband, pale but electric. "What letters?" she demanded, and turned to Miss Grey. "Eliza, did Aunt Seraphine—" Miss Grey's voice was steady. "The Duchess kept a record." "Of favours." "Of promises." "Of betrayals, politely named arrangements." Beatrice gave a desperate laugh. "Well, then half London is in that drawer. Half London never bought a poisoner," Sharp said, grim. "But one person did." Poirot shook his head. "Not bought," he said softly. "Arranged. There is a difference." "A subtle one. English." He turned to Sharp. "The clock," he said. "You see it, a false time. Who benefits from a false time?" "Someone with an alibi at the true time," Sharp answered. "Exactment. Someone who needs the hour of death to match a committee meeting or a club luncheon." Poirot looked at Sir Lionel's carefully ironed conscience. "Your telephone call at 3, Sir Lionel. Did anyone hear the Duchess answer it?" Sir Lionel's hand lay flat on the desk, as if to quiet a tremor. "I spoke with Miss Grey." Miss Grey looked stricken. I didn't speak to you. I spoke to the porter who said you had called." "The telephone line was like a bee in a jar," Poirot finished. "And later, surely, it was an obedient bee. The alibi is tender. Do not bend it." Sir Lionel drew himself up. "You presume too much, sir." "And you tidy too much," Poirot said. "The hinge, the varnish, the clock. To tidy is human. To over-tidy is suspicious." A constable entered with a note. Sharp tore it open. "Lab report preliminary," he read. "Powder mixed with snuff contains nicotine in high concentration and traces of digitalis, nicotine, Poirot murmured. Appropriate. A murderer who chooses the scent of the victim's habit. And digitalis, an old village flower, foxglove, an English countryside whisper. Beatrice's cigarette case clicked open and shut, like an insect. "I hate the countryside," she said abruptly. "The air is so clean you can hear yourself think." Poirot smiled sadly. "Then perhaps you should not go there." He regarded them like a kindly and merciless schoolmaster. "We will, if you please, assemble this evening in the Salon Bleu," he said. "I would like to ask each of you to bring me one thing, your patience, and I will bring mine an answer that is not yet complete, but which has the shape of truth. And if we refuse," Sir Lionel demanded. Poirot spread his hands. "Then the truth will come without an audience. But it prefers applause." He left them to their silences. In the corridor he paused by the carriage clock, raised it, and peered behind. A minute smear of clear varnish on the wooden backboard, no larger than the nail of a little finger. He smiled to himself. Someone had not merely moved the clock, they had glued the clock, and then later pried it free when the glue behaved too well. What detail would you have seen? The lily panel, the varnish smear, the nicotine's polite bitterness? Poirot, satisfied and sorrowful in equal measure, smoothed his moustaches. "Little grey cells," he said. "Prepare yourselves." Chapter 6. The cabinet-maker's brush morning sat primly over Pimlico when Poirot paid a call on Mr. Abberline, cabinet-maker and restorer, a man with nails as tidy as ledger lines. The little shop was scented with turpentine, shellac, old wood, warmed to patience. "Monsieur Poirot," Abberline greeted, surprised, then pleased. "Your fame comes ahead of you like a brass plate." Poirot inclined his head. "Fame is only a very visible calling card. I come, monsieur, about a house in Belgravia and a small matter of varnish." Abberline's hands paused over a drawer front. "Ah, the Duchess's people. I mended a drawer there last week." "Good wood. Fussy specifications?" "You used a small brush," Poirot suggested, "and a clear varnish of a particular odour, resinous with a glossy edge." Abberline smiled wryly. "You speak as if to a wine." "Yes, I keep a thin coat of copal varnish for old surfaces that must not bruise with heavier polish." "You were asked to touch anything besides the drawer?" Abberline hesitated. "A gentleman who was there, not the butler. A gentleman asked me, in a private tone, whether such a varnish might steady a hinge on a small object. Something delicate. He mentioned a snuffbox. I said one does not varnish the working parts of a box as one would a banister. He said no matter. He merely asked. He paid for the inquiry." Poirot's moustaches approved. "And the gentleman?" "A London sort," Abberline said, though the vowels were trained. "Tall, spare, very correct, with a tie-pin shaped like a sword knot. He signed the work order as L. Ash." I did not comment. "Très bien," Poirot breathed. Sir Lionel clipped to initials as if modesty could disguise purpose. Abberline turned to a little tray and produced a second curiosity. He also asked whether one could file away a tiny internal notch from the rim of a box without leaving a visible scar, he added. I said one could. If one were careless, one would show it. If one were careful, one would leave only a suggestion where once there was a bite. Poirot's eyes warmed. "And were you asked to perform such a service?" "I declined," Abberline said crisply. "I restore. I do not falsify." "The gentleman left me a sovereign for my restraint." Poirot bowed, delighted. "England is saved," he murmured, "by a sovereign that paid for honesty." He purchased a vial of the cabinet-maker's copal to have it sent in his pocket, then walked back through streets that turned their faces to the morning like children to a schoolroom. He thought of Sir Lionel's neat jaw, of letters behind lilies, of a duchess who prepared for voyages. At the Belgravia house, Inspector Sharp had installed the orderly chaos of officialdom, a constable at the door, another by the study. Miss Grey moved like a bell without a clapper, making tea that could not cure anything. Lady Beatrice, fragile and fierce, had drawn red about her eyes as if to warn the day not to come near. Poirot asked for a moment with the telephone. He lifted the receiver and listened. The line hummed politely. He examined the cradle, then the cord. 2 inches from the base, the insulation bore a faint, sticky gloss. Poirot touched it with a gloved nail and brought away a whisper of hardened glue. "English tidiness," he murmured. "Always the glue," Sharp joined him. "The chemist's follow-up," he said, handing over a sheet. "The mixture is precisely compounded, nicotine extract of high concentration and a measured amount of tincture of digitalis. Whoever did this understood both taste and time." "Taste to disguise the bitterness," Poirot mused. "Time to slow the heart without drama." "And the varnish to veil the scent until the moment of opening." Sharp frowned. "The varnish?" "Smell, Inspector," Poirot said gently. "Our senses are the cheap detectives we employ without wages. The Snuffbox's hinge bore a harder polish than the lid, an attempt to mask the addition of something to the snuff by adding a different odor to the box itself." He took out Abeline's vial, uncorked it, and let the air make the connection. Sharp's eyes narrowed. "Capal," Poirot said. "Not ordinary household polish. A restorer's toy, and a gentleman's mistake." "Sir Lionel," Sharp said, not triumphantly, but as one confirms a column of numbers. The letters would hang him a dozen ways without the rope. "But murder requires proof more intimate than political arithmetic," Poirot finished. "We will gather it." He asked for Carlo next. The valet came, his black hair subdued into respectability. "Carlo," Poirot said, "you rung the yard yesterday. Did you see Sir Lionel in the house before 5? Carlo bit his lip. "He came at 4:40, signore. He told me to say him at the door. He walked straight to the study. He knocked very gently. He went in. 5 minutes. Then he left the study, went to the boudoir. Miss Grey was not in the hall then. I took the letters for the post." "Grazie," Poirot said. "You see, Inspector? The time creeps like a shadow around the truth." In the Salon Bleu, Poirot found Victor Morel admiring a Sèvres saucer as if it had flirted with him. "You will forgive me," Poirot said amiably, "if I ask you a question ungallant. Where were you at 4:50 yesterday?" "In the street below," Morel said without fluster. "I had stopped to speak with a gentleman about a consignment of frames. The gentleman is unromantically named Mr. Pottle, and he will vouch." "I should not like to be mistaken for a vengeful curator." Poirot raised a hand. "I mistake you for nothing, monsieur." "Your passion is for custody, not for annihilation." Morel smiled sadly. "Objects we love are most beautiful preserved. People one loves." He did not finish the thought, Poirot, compassionate, did not ask him to. He sent for Miss Grey last. "Mademoiselle," he said, "the Duchess asked you to burn a letter yesterday." "Yes." Miss Grey's voice wore honesty like linen. "It was addressed in her Grace's hand to a person I did not recognize. She said only that the letter belonged to the past, and that the past had become uncivil." "And did you burn it?" "Yes, in the small grate of the study." She watched. It seemed to comfort her. "And the key she asked you to find?" "I did not find it yesterday," Miss Grey admitted. "I found it only this morning in a work basket, wrapped in tissue, as if it had been put aside by hands that were careful, even when tired." Poirot nodded. "You are very true, mademoiselle," he said. "It is a quality that makes a woman formidable." When she had gone, Sharp said bluntly, "We could arrest Sir Lionel now." Poirot's look was mild. "England loves a performance," he said. "We will give her one. But first, I will ask a question to which I already know the answer. I will go to Sir Lionel's club," he did, and returned with a small victory. The porter remembered Sir Lionel stepping out between 4:30 and 4:45 for air, then returning until 5:20. Clubs keep time as monasteries do. A gentleman's absence is a perturbation in a schedule that prides itself on its lack of excitement. "It fits," Sharp said. He could have gone by cab, tinkered with clock and telephone, swapped the snuff, and still made his Foreign Office meeting into an alibi by insistence. Exactly, Poirot said. But I should like the rope to be braided, not single. There is one more strand. He lifted the snuff-box and with delicate care tipped the remaining grains onto black card. He examined the inside rim with a glass. There, subtler than shyness, a faint crescent where a notch had once been. He smiled with something like pity. "Ah, mon ami," he murmured, to the absent Sir Lionel. "You hunted for letters in the wrong box." He replaced the snuff and closed the lid. "We are ready," he told Sharp. "Invite them this evening. We will ask the past to take a chair." Chapter 7. The room fills with secrets. They gathered at 8, electricity humming in the lamps as if it too had an opinion. The Salon Bleu hosted the living like a very polite courtroom. Sir Lionel stood near the mantel, a man posed for a portrait that might outlive his reputation. Lady Beatrice curled into a chaise, all quicksilver nerves and hard edges. Miss Grey took a straight-backed chair and sat very straight in it. Carlo hovered by the door with the humility of an apostrophe. Victor Morel arranged himself to the left of the snuff-box as if conceding centre stage to an elder prima donna. Inspector Sharp and a constable took shadowed positions. They were English shadows, disciplined. Poirot, neat as a theorem, stood before them. He spoke in the gentle tone of a professor about to explain the very simple reason. One has been wrong for a very long time. "Mesdames, messieurs," he began, "the Duchess Seraphine is dead. Science tells us what? Nicotine and digitalis arranged themselves upon her little habit to still the grander habit of her heart. But we are not content with the laboratory. We desire the story, who, why, how, when, and the conveniences, false time, noisy telephone that attended the performance." Beatrice's cigarette case clicked open and shut. Poirot smiled. "We begin with the small," he said. An odour of varnish, copal, to be precise, at the hinge of the snuff-box, and a varnished smear on the backboard of the mantel clock. Both are out of place in a house that prefers beeswax and silences. A cabinet-maker identifies a gentleman who asked him hypothetical questions about filing away a notch in a box and about varnish to steady a hinge. He signed his inquiry L. Ash, Sir Lionel Ashcombe. Sir Lionel's face took on the stillness of a well-planted tree. "I inquired about the box because it interested my wife," he said evenly. "The rest is fancy." Poirot's eyes were kind. "Fancy is only practice for truth, monsieur." The notch that once existed on the inner rim served a purpose, most likely to engage a tiny catch for a secret inner leaf. That catch was removed. Why? Because someone, having heard a rumour that letters were hidden in the snuff-box, went hunting. But he hunted in the wrong forest. The letters were behind lilies in the study, where he went for 5 minutes yesterday at 20 to 5. Beatrice's gaze jumped to her husband. "You told me you only telephoned," she whispered. Sir Lionel's mouth did not move. "I stepped in to retrieve a committee paper," he said. "Ask Sharp." "I will," Sharp said. "And I will also ask the club porter who watched you step out and return at the very times Monsieur Poirot describes." Sir Lionel's hand flexed on the mantel. "I am a public servant," he said. "I will not be tried in a drawing-room," Poirot bowed. "Very English. But I am very Belgian and I prefer parlours." Let us continue. At 5 o'clock the Duchess sat with her snuff-box. A corner of her habit she took a pinch when reflective. The poison was not in the box yesterday morning. Miss Grey dusted as usual, and she, like me, is sensitive to a different scent. It was added yesterday afternoon. The varnish at the hinge masked the sharper bitterness until the lid warmed under the hand. At some time between 4:40 and 5, our murderer entered the boudoir and switched the contents of the box for snuff properly doctored. He also glued lightly the back of the mantel clock to its board, and later urged the hands to a time that would be convenient for a man who required an alibi. The glue misbehaved. The clock halted later at 9:27, a foolish after-effect that betrayed the attempt. A blob of the same glue glistened on the telephone cord, where it had been used to fix the receiver slightly askew, making the line buzz like a bee in a jar when one tried to ring, creating confusion about just who spoke to whom and when. Sharp's chin dipped once. The constable wrote very fast, as if speed could make honesty permanent. Poirot looked to Lady Beatrice. "You, madame, had quarrels about money," he said softly. "You hate the countryside and foxgloves grow there, yet you had neither the skill to mix such a draught nor the serenity to tidy after yourself. You are not our poisoner. Your vice is courage."
"Poison requires a colder one," Beatrice laughed and cried on the same breath.
"I am a coward, Monsieur Poirot." "You are English," Poirot returned with affection. "They are cousins. Mr. Morel," he resumed, "you desired the snuff-box as a scholar desires a beautiful contradiction, but you never touched it when it mattered. Your alibi is as sound as your taste." Morel bowed without triumph. "Carlo," Poirot said, "you are too reverent of objects to varnish a hinge, and too frightened of the telephone to glue it. Also, you rang the yard. Murderers rarely summon the law before the law summons them." Carlo crossed himself again, relieved. "And thus," Poirot said, turning, "we are left with Sir Lionel. His motive is the easiest. The lilies hid letters, names and numbers that would unmake a career." The Duchess had begun to think of voyages and lists. She burned one letter yesterday, but she would not burn them all. She had kept them as one keeps receipts for debts unpaid. Sir Lionel removed the catch from the snuff-box, believing the papers within. When he discovered emptiness, he looked elsewhere. He found the lilies, perhaps later, perhaps before, and understood that as long as Seraphine breathed, the past had a voice. He preferred her silence. Sir Lionel's colour had not changed. It was an accomplishment. "All this," he said, "and nothing that would convict." Poirot took a small paper from his pocket. "I am not without my own receipts," he said. "The cabinet-maker's note, signed L. Ashe. A club porter, ready to say, 'A gentleman went out precisely at the necessary time.'"
"A chemist? Ah, yes, I did not forget this little expedition, who sold 3 days ago a bottle of digitalis tincture to a man with a prescription written in an excellent diplomatic hand."
"The name on the chit is a clerk's. The hand is yours. You may argue forgery. You may argue coincidence. But it is much coincidence in a room very small." "All for the nicotine?" Sir Lionel asked, with a terrible calm. "The nicotine," Poirot said, "you extracted yourself. Any patient man can coax it from loose tobacco with spirits. Indeed, there are pamphlets, very English, that warn the householder not to do so. Our chemist confirms the tincture is commercial. The nicotine is homemade." Sharp stepped forward. "Sir Lionel Ashcombe, I must—" "Encore," Poirot said softly, a hand lifting. "Two last details for the little grey cells to clap politely. First, the chain attached to the snuff-box is new. The Duchess had it fitted after finding the box moved. It is not old. Sir Lionel, you often mocked the box in her hearing, called it a trifle. Your mockery was camouflage for curiosity. You handled it before the chain, and your failure to find letters made you certain you must look elsewhere. Second, the false time. Only a man who worships schedule thinks time can be glued. Only a public servant imagines the universe will hold still if he pins the clock to the wall. It is a kind of hubris, very English, very official." Sir Lionel's mouth twitched. The room breathed in. "And so," Poirot concluded, "we have motive, the letters. Means the mixture. Opportunity, the missing 20 minutes. And the little arts, varnish, glue, the telephone's pretended bee. We have also the human detail." The Duchess waved Lady Beatrice away in the mirror. She did not wish her niece to witness a private habit, or perhaps she was already feeling the whisper of sleep that would not end. After Sir Lionel returned to his club at 5:20 to be seen, he came here later to collect a paper. He was collecting the success of his design. Beatrice half rose. "Lionel, tell them it is all a misunderstanding." Sir Lionel's hands were very still on the mantel.
"It is not," he said, almost gently.
"It is an arrangement."
"I arranged it."
"The Duchess arranged so much for so many years. A counter-arrangement." He turned to Sharp. "Shall we be finished?" Sharp stepped forward, voice thick with reluctance and duty. He spoke the formula. The constable, like a shadow discovering weight, moved to Sir Lionel's elbow. Lady Beatrice made a sound that was not a word. Miss Grey closed her eyes and opened them again with a strength that was also mercy. Victor Morel looked at the snuff-box with a grief that included beauty, and Carlo wept as quietly as a kettle forgotten at the back of the stove. Poirot remained still, and in his stillness was something like prayer. Chapter 8. False Accents, True Letters. After the arrest, the house inhabited a new silence, one with edges. Sharp stayed to inventory the letters behind the lilies. He handled them with the respect of a man who has learned that paper can derail a train. Beatrice, trembling and furious, in love and out of illusions, demanded that the letters be burned there and then. Sharp refused. "The past will be examined by men who are paid to be unromantic," he said. "It is not my privilege to unmake it." Miss Grey approached Poirot with the careful gait of a person crossing a fragile bridge. "She wanted me to have something," she said. "Yesterday, after the reading, she tried to say it."
"I thought it was merely kindness."
"Now I think it was a bequest of duty." Poirot's voice softened. "The Duchess trusted you, mademoiselle. She trusted your order. It is a heavier thing than money, and more dangerous." "She wished me to keep the house until it could think for itself," Miss Grey said, almost smiling through the ache. "She said houses think very slowly." "Comme c'est vrai," Poirot murmured. "Houses are slow philosophers. They are never quick to judge, but they never forget." Morel lingered, then came to Poirot. "You knew I would not risk damaging a thing so perfect," he said. "Yet for a moment, there in your theatre, you let the gaze drift to me." "Why?" "Because one must be fair even to the guilty," Poirot said. "The shadow must pass over all faces before it settles upon one. Otherwise the shadow itself becomes a tyrant." Morel nodded gravely.
"I will write about the snuff-box," he said.
"Not about crime. About craftsmanship, about the miniature, about how something small can carry a nation upon its lid, and about how people mistake where the secrets are," Poirot suggested. "In the snuff-box, no letters. In the lilies, many." "Just so," Morel said. Beatrice approached last, bloodless with a kind of grace that is only born in catastrophe.
"I am not brave," she said to Poirot with a twisted smile.
"But I am not cruel either."
"If I had known—" "Ah," Poirot said. "If." The longest word.
"The Duchess understood you, I think. She wished to brace you, not to break you. You will find that the will contains something like a warning in the form of a gift." Beatrice blinked.
"Aunt Seraphine always liked her warnings to look like bracelets." "Then wear it," Poirot said.
"And do not let your courage call itself by another name," Sharp rejoined them. "We will take Sir Lionel to the yard," he said.
"He has said little."
"He will say little, but the little is enough." "And the letters?" Beatrice demanded again. "They go to the Home Office," Sharp said. "With my report." He glanced at Poirot.
"And yours, if you are willing." Poirot inclined his head.
"I will accompany them," he said.
"An escort of mustaches," Sharp almost smiled.
"You are a very tidy man, Monsieur Poirot." "Tidy is not the same as cruel," Poirot said. Chapter 9. Shadows at the yard. The lamps at Scotland Yard were never kind. They shone with a cold candour, as if truth could be coaxed by wattage. Sir Lionel Ashcombe sat in the small interview room, his cuffs immaculate, his voice level. Inspector Sharp, dogged as a ploughman, asked and noted, asked and noted. Poirot sat quietly in the corner, his moustaches as alert as cats on a wall. "You admit, Sir Lionel," Sharp pressed, "that you inquired about the snuff-box's construction. You admit you visited the house between 4:30 and 5, and again at 5:20. You admit the Duchess had possession of papers compromising to your career? Sir Lionel's smile was cold. You cannot prove the poison was mine, Poirot stirred. But we can prove you prepared the theatre, the varnish on the hinge.
The glue upon the clock and the telephone. These are not poisons, no, but they are accompaniments.
Who else in that house has the temperament to orchestrate such tidy devices? Not Lady Beatrice, too impulsive. Not Morel, whose hands itch to preserve. Not Alter. Not Carlo, whose fear of tidiness betrays him.
And Miss Grey?
None. She is honest in her dust. Sir Lionel's eyes narrowed. You are persuasive, Poirot. But the law requires more than persuasion. Sharp leaned forward. The chemist's record, the cabinet-maker's testimony, the porter's memory. It is more than persuasion, it is a chain. A chain, Poirot echoed, as the new chain upon the snuff-box, a detail small yet decisive.
Tell me, Sir Lionel, why mock the box if you had not handled it?
Why speak of trifles if the trifle had not refused to give up its secret? For the first time, Sir Lionel's composure cracked. Because she mocked me, he snapped. Seraphine, with her secrets, her power, her letters. She held the past like a whip, and I was weary of being struck by dead hands. Silence folded the room. Sharp looked at Poirot. Poirot merely inclined his head. Confession was never loud. It was tired. Later, leaving the yard, Sharp muttered, "There's something bitter in it, Poirot." He was not greedy nor jealous. He was merely proud. And pride kills as quick as arsenic. Poirot adjusted his hat. Oui, mon ami. Pride is the poison that does not need a box. It dwells already in the heart. Chapter 10. The house thinks. Slowly, weeks passed, and the Belgravia townhouse altered in its breathing. The corridors no longer echoed with the rustle of the Duchess's silk, yet her presence was a perfume, faint but insistent. Lady Beatrice had remained, her nerves worn to transparency, but her resolve stiffened. Miss Grey, steady as a pendulum, oversaw the house with the patience of ivy. One afternoon, Poirot returned at Miss Grey's invitation. The Salon Bleu had been arranged exactly as before, the snuff-box upon the escritoire, the clock polished and punctual. Yet the air felt less brittle, as if time had sighed and agreed to resume. "Monsieur Poirot," Miss Grey said softly, "I wish to thank you, not only for discovering who, but for restoring what?"
The house.
"It is calmer now," Poirot smiled.
Houses are like widows, mademoiselle.
They grieve, they remember, but they also learn to walk without leaning. Beatrice entered, carrying a small velvet pouch. She looked older, yet also freer. "Aunt Seraphine left me this," she said.
Not money, but a bracelet, gold set with tiny lilies.
"She said it would remind me that courage grows in gardens." Poirot touched the bracelet with reverence. "Then wear it with intention, Lady Beatrice, and never mistake nerves for weakness. Your aunt knew the difference." Victor Morel visited too, bringing with him a printed catalogue for a charity exhibition. On its cover gleamed a photograph of the snuff-box, captured, admired, but guarded. "It will be shown once," he said, and then returned. Objects should not be forced to perform forever. Carlo shyly brought tea. His grief was honest, but he smiled now when Miss Grey praised his polish. Even servants, Poirot mused, carry histories in their hands. As evening fell, the carriage clock chimed 7, each note clear and without hesitation. Poirot listened with satisfaction. Time had been untangled from glue and falsehood. It ticked now with the simple arrogance of clocks that believe themselves eternal. He turned to the women. "Madame la Duchess Seraphine is gone," he said gently, "but she has left you each a task, to keep her secrets wisely, to forgive her sharpness, and to live not as shadows of her will, but as continuations of her courage. Houses, boxes, clocks, these are only metaphors. The true heirlooms are habits, and habits, mesdames, are the most difficult treasures to master." He rose, adjusted his cuffs, and took from his pocket the Duchess's obstinate pocket watch.
It ticked now, obedient and cheerful, as though it had decided to serve him alone.
Poirot smiled at it. What detail would you have noticed? He asked softly, almost to himself. The lilies behind the panel? The varnish on the hinge? Or perhaps only the very English faith that secrets stay still?
No. Secrets are restless. He bowed to Beatrice and Miss Grey, then stepped into the street. London glowed noisy, untidy, endlessly alive.
Poirot, neat among its chaos, walked on, his moustaches gleaming, his little grey cells content. And in the house behind him, the Duchess's snuff-box sat silent at last. Final chapter. Poirot's little grey cells. Take a bow 2 days later, in a room that preferred tobacco to confession, Poirot sat with Inspector Sharp. The formalities were formal. The tea was less so. The city had begun to talk, as cities do, in sentences that thought themselves paragraphs. Your report, Sharp said, reads like a sermon. The Home Office prefers inventories, Poirot demurred. Inventories are sermons with numbers, he said. They serve the same God, accountancy, Sharp laughed despite himself. Sir Lionel will be charged. The chemical evidence, the cabinet maker, the club, the chemist's ledger, the sum is precise. Poirot nodded.
I regret for Lady Beatrice.
I do not regret for the habit of a man who thought time a servant and women a convenience. Hard, monsieur, Sharp observed. Exact, Poirot corrected gently. The Duchess kept letters because she had been compelled too often to forgive men their conveniences. When she grew tired, she made coziness into a fortress. It is a very English alchemy, Sharp glanced at him sidelong. You enjoy teasing us? I enjoy saving you from yourselves. Poirot's smile held grandeur in miniature. And now I will bother you with trifles, because with trifles one cleans the conscience. He ticked them off on small white fingers. 1. The varnish. Our murderer chose it to mask the changed odour of the snuff. But varnish hardens and cracks if urged to behave like glue. The smear behind the clock, the gloss on the telephone cord, these are the fingerprints of pride. 2. The notch removed from the snuff-box. In removing it, the murderer thought he had disarmed the box's secret. He had only demonstrated that he believed the rumours too eagerly, and that he had touched the box before the chain was fitted. The Duchess added the chain after she discovered it had been moved. The man who mocked heirlooms was in fact a collector of their humiliations. 3. The telephone line. Glue under the cradle is a child's trick. A better man would have arranged a diversion at the exchange, but official minds love official solutions. A humming receiver prevented calls from being logged precisely and allowed him to claim conversations he did not have. 4. The chemistry. Nicotine extracted at home persuades me of a murderer who reads without imagination. Pamphlets warning against household experiments, manuals about evidence. Digitalis with a chemist's label persuades me of a man who knows how to procure a prescription through a subordinate and imagines that the institution will protect him. Institutions protected him for years. They failed him when a woman's patience outlived her fear. Sharp sipped tea. You are a moralist, he said.
I rather thought you were only a detective. Poirot spread his hands.
The difference, mon ami, is smaller than you think. He rose. I must pay a last call, he said. On the Duchess. In the Belgravia house, Miss Grey received him as one welcomes a doctor who brings no medicine and much kindness. The Salon Bleu had resumed its posture. The carriage clock ticked without glue. The snuff-box lay closed upon the escritoire, a small night sky rimmed with diamonds. Monsieur Poirot, Miss Grey said, the will was read this morning. Her Grace leaves me the keeping of the house for 6 months, after which Lady Beatrice may decide to keep or to sell. She leaves Mr. Morel the right to exhibit the snuff-box once, with my permission, in aid of a charity. She leaves Inspector Sharp one of her late husband's walking sticks. She said men who stand so much should stand handsomely.
And she leaves you, Miss Grey's voice faltered, a bouquet of gratitude, which turns out to be a very old pocket watch that refuses to keep time unless one speaks to it.
The solicitor apologizes for the eccentricity. Poirot laughed softly, with a moisture to it that belonged to kitchens and not to courts. "But it is perfect," he said. "I speak.
It keeps time.
We understand one another." He took the watch, round, obstinate, engraved with a tiny lily, and put it in his waistcoat as if returning a bird to a cage it did not mind. "Will you keep the house?" he asked Miss Grey. "For a while," she said, "until it thinks without me." "Then I leave it in your care," Poirot said. He placed his fingertips upon the snuff-box and nodded to it as one nods to an adversary who proved worthy. "You, madame," he told it, "have caused enough poetry." As he turned to go, Lady Beatrice came in, bareheaded, hair like a flag of truce. She looked smaller and, in the paradox of grief, older and younger. "I have decided," she said to Miss Grey, with a steadiness that made Poirot proud of the human race for a moment, "to keep the house at least the 6 months."
"And the charity my aunt refused," she smiled, thinly but real.
"I will fund it myself." With fewer bracelets and more intention, Miss Grey's eyes shone. "She would be very happy," she said. "Would she?" Beatrice asked, then laughed at her own superstition. "Perhaps that is not how happiness works. Perhaps happiness is only good manners." Poirot paused by the door. "And good manners," he said, "are only kindness made habitual. Keep them, mesdames." In the street, the afternoon made a neat bow. London went on with its respectable sins and its unexpected graces. Poirot adjusted his hat, consulted the Duchess's obstinate watch, which obligingly began to tick, and smiled at the sky. "What detail would you have noticed?" he asked the date, amused. "The varnish? The new chain? The glue that thought itself clever? Or the English faith that time, like a servant, will obey?" He touched his mustaches, the twin commas that had learned the end of this sentence, and walked away, leaving the house to think slowly and, perhaps, kindly. The snuff-box, in its case, reflected a tiny, perfect world, and in that world, at last, there was order. From the diary of Hercule Poirot, the date, a quiet Sunday, grey skies above London. The location, my little flat, with the fire gentle and the curtains drawn against the untidy city. I, Hercule Poirot, have this evening completed the final note upon the affair of the Duchess's snuff-box. How strange that an object so small, so delicate, should carry within it the echoes of dynasties, the burdens of letters, and at last the weight of death. The English, they are curious in this matter. They believe secrets are like their gardens, trimmed, bordered, obedient. Mais non. Secrets are like ivy. They creep, they cling, they grow where no hand invites them. The Duchess, clever woman, understood this truth. She kept her letters, not because she wished to use them, but because she refused to allow the past to vanish without witness. It is, perhaps, the instinct of the aristocrat to preserve even scandal as if it were china. Sir Lionel, what can I say? Pride, wounded and disguised as dignity, led him by the hand. He thought himself cleverer than clocks, tidier than dust, more precise than time itself. Yet he forgot.